176. The nays are 247.
Mrs. Napolitano.
Votes aye.
Mrs. Napolitano votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 177, the nays are 247. The amendment is not adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
That's your card to go over there.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, pardon me, the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 2578, and pursuant to House Resolution 688, I report the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole.
The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 2578, and pursuant to House Resolution 688, reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Is a separate vote demanded on any amendment to the amendment reported from the Committee of the Whole? If not, the question is on adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute, as amended. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, third reading.
A bill to amend the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act related to a segment of the Lower Merced River in California and for other purposes.
The House will come to order. For purposes, the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
In its current form, I am.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Perlmutter of Colorado moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 2578, to the Committee on Natural Resources with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of the bill, insert the following. Title 15, Reducing the Risk of Wildfire, Protecting Tribal Sovereignty, Make It in America. Section 1501, Reducing the Risk of Wildfire. The Secretaries of Agriculture and Interior are authorized to enter into contracts or agreements with a state to permit the state to treat insect-infected trees and remove hazardous fuels on federal land located in the state in order to reduce the risk of wildfire. Priority shall be given to the protection of homes, schools, and health care, nursing and assisted living facilities. Section 1502, Protecting Tribal Sovereignty. Nothing in this act shall override tribal sovereignty, including with respect to Native American burial or other sacred sites. Section 1503, Make It in America. The Secretary of the Interior shall ensure that all items offered for sale in any gift shop or visitor center located within a unit of the National Park System are produced in the United States.
House will come to order. House will come to order. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this motion to recommit. It is the final amendment to the bill. It will not kill the bill, and if adopted, the House will vote on final passage in this series of votes.
House will come to order. House will come to order. Gentleman from Colorado may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment has three parts. They are short and direct. First involves wildfires. and the ability and the authority of the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture to enter into contracts with the states to clear hazardous fuel to prevent wildfires, as well as treat insect-infested trees. And we'll get into that. Second part is very clear. Just says nothing in this act shall override tribal sovereignty, including with respect to Native American burial or other sacred sites. Speaks for itself. Finally, it's about making sure that in the parks and in the gift shops that the goods that are sold there are made in America. So let's just begin with the wildfire piece. As Smokey the Bear says, only you can prevent forest fires. Right now, across the West and throughout America, we have wildfires dotting our country. 500,000 acres are burning.
Gentlemen will suspend. House will come to order. Gentleman from Colorado may continue.
Thank you. 500,000 acres across our country are on fire right now. In Alaska, Arizona, California, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Wyoming, and in my home state of Colorado. Right now, we're battling a very big wildfire just north of where I live called the High Park Fire. 60,000 acres are currently burning. We have about 50% contained through the efforts of 1,800 firefighters. Some of the best federal firefighters we have, as well as state and local firefighters, who are doing a tremendous job in a situation where we have very dry conditions, record temperatures, and a very erratic fire. Now, what we can do and what is missing from this bill is any public policy concerning what to do with insect-infested forests. And we've had a terrible infestation of what they call the pine beetle. And it makes tremendous fuel. And so what this bill does is it gives the authority to the Agriculture Department and the Interior Department to work with the states to clear these insect-ravaged forests. We need to have that done to prevent forest fires in the future. It's as simple as that. It ought to be very easy for everyone to support that. Secondly, again, the Act says specifically, or this amendment says specifically, the Act shall not override tribal sovereignty. We've reached treaties with the various tribes. Those things control, not this particular bill, and we state that specifically. Finally, we address something that I think irks many of us in this chamber when we have a visitor center in our national parks which is selling goods made in other countries. It just seems wrong. We want to make things in America. Manufacturing in America is key to this country's economic growth and prosperity. We have a saying, if we make it in America, we'll make it in America. So 3 very simple, very direct amendments to this bill which make the bill much better, address public policy that is not addressed in the bill, that should have been addressed in the bill, especially the wildfire mitigation piece, something that you would have expected to be right in the heart of this thing after Texas was ravaged by so many wildfires last year and we knew dry conditions existed across the West. So I urge my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to support this common sense amendment to mitigate and prevent forest fires, to make sure that tribal sovereignty is respected, and that we make things in America so that we make it here in America. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you and I yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
The Speaker of the House is not in order.
House will come to order. The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I've had an opportunity several times to come down here to debate the motions to recommit, and I've prefaced virtually every time I've come down here with history repeats itself. Mr. Speaker, history is repeating itself one more time. Why do I say that? Because probably the biggest issue that Americans are concerned about is jobs. This is another effort that deals with American jobs by dealing with regulation that slows down economic activity. So what does the other side do? They try to put up another impediment to a bill that is straightforward, had transparency in committee, had a full debate in committee, and put together to debate on the floor. It's the same arguments that we have that frankly are meaningless. Now, to the essence of what the gentleman's amendment does. All of this is essentially redundant. It's in law right now. Is this just a political move on the minority's part? Is that what it is? If the issue is really trying to deal with firefighting in the West, I would remind this body, Mr. Speaker, that 2 weeks ago we passed legislation to allow the Forest Service to buy tankers to fight forest fires. We've already done that. You know, all I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that history repeats itself. Let's vote down this motion to recommit, and let's vote for the jobs bill, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman from Washington yields back. Without objection, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the motion to recommit. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. No. The noes have it. The motion is not adopted.
Request a record vote, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
from Colorado, recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of the bill if ordered, and the motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2938. This is a 15-minute vote.
A procedural vote, the last chance to change the land and water bill before a vote on final passage. Earlier today, Congressman Hastings and Congressman Markey talked on the floor about the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, the Conservation and Economic Growth Act is aimed squarely at cutting government red tape and bureaucracy to boost local economic development and job creation. This legislation contains 14 common-sense bills from the House Natural Resources Committee, nearly all of which receive bipartisan support. By solving problems and reducing red tape, this legislation will have a real impact on the people they affect. Among its many economic and job creation benefits, the bill will encourage tourism and recreation by ensuring public access to public lands. It will promote responsible use of our resources. It will protect the environment. It will secure federal lands along our borders. And it promotes clean and renewable hydropower. Month after month, Mr. Chairman, Republicans in Congress have been focused on encouraging and supporting new job creation. The House has passed over 30 job creation bills that sit in the Senate where Democrat leaders have refused to take any action. By reducing red tape, promoting American-made energy, and streamlining bureaucracy, we can start creating jobs for tens of millions of Americans who are looking for work. The Conservation and Economic Growth Act fits into the same job creation mold. When it comes to the Environmental Protection Agency, the American public is well aware of the ability of this federal agency to slow our economy with debilitating regulations. And when it comes to our federal lands, which are predominantly located in the western part of the United States, there is plenty of bureaucracy and red tape to go around. In that regard, there are 4 primary federal land management agencies: the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the National Park Service. Combined, they manage over 600 million acres of federal land and have over 60,000 federal employees. Many of these federal employees do important, helpful work, but there are many times when their actions, or more importantly, or as importantly, outdated federal laws have a tremendous negative impact on their surrounding communities. But these federal policies, restrictions, and the bureaucratic decisions can harm local economies and the public's ability to access public lands for the multiple uses for which these public lands were intended. It doesn't have to take federal spending or taxpayer money to solve these problems. It simply takes Congress making common sense changes in laws and regulations to restore reasonableness, transparency, accountability, and yes, Mr. Chairman, sometimes sanity to the actions of the federal government. That is the purpose of this underlying legislation, to fix local and national problems caused by federal red tape and policies that are harming the public and our economy throughout America. We'll hear more specific information from the sponsors of these solutions during the debate this afternoon. And Mr. Chairman, this legislation also reflects the promises of House Republicans when they were elected as a new majority in 2010. The Conservation and Economic Growth Act is an efficient way to uphold Republicans' commitment to an open and transparent House. The text of the Act has been online since last Tuesday and available for members and the public to read now for a week. Each and every one of the 14 bills that is in this package has had a public hearing, has been open to amendment in the committee, has been voted on in the committee, and amendments will be debated and voted on here today in the full House. Now, Mr. Chairman, this stands in stark contrast to the previous way of doing business, when we had monster omnibus bills that were forced through the House without any chance of amendment. In fact, one can compare this small 14-bill package that has undergone full public and legislative review with the 2009 monster omnibus lands bill enacted into law when the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress. The 2009 omnibus bill was over 1,200 pages in length. It cost $10 billion. It contained over 170 bills, including 75 that had never been considered in the House. And yet, through all of this process, not one single amendment was allowed to be offered, and even the minority, the Republicans at that time, were denied an opportunity with the motion to recommit. Well, those days of the monster omnibus are over. No longer will controversial bills that haven't seen the light of day will be hidden deep inside a 1,000-page bill. Since the start of this Congress, we reviewed bills one by one in the Natural Resources Committee. Each has had a public subcommittee hearing, and once the committee acts, the full House considers them in a transparent manner. This bill, the underlying legislation we're dealing with, lives up to this standard. It is an antidote to the abusive practices of the past. It is a bite-sized package that can be easily read, and today is getting a thorough debate on the House floor. So now the House can act to approve this bill, to roll back red tape, to restore some common sense, to solve problems, and to boost economic activity. This bill deserves bipartisan support, and I urge my colleagues to vote for its passage. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise in opposition to H.R. 2578. Now, some of you may recall the old Rod Serling TV show, The Twilight Zone. At the beginning of each episode, Serling would explain that viewers were about to enter another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind, a journey into a wondrous land of imagination. Next stop, the Twilight Zone. Well, that is very much where we are this week on the House floor. We are truly entering another dimension, a wondrous land of paranoid imagination. Republicans call it the operational control zone, but it is really the drone zone. Submitted for your consideration the following facts. This week, world leaders are gathering in Rio to deal with the threat of global warming. Meanwhile, the majority has us gathered here to address the threat sea lions pose to salmon. Right now, firefighters are working day and night to try to contain wildfire in forests in Colorado and New Mexico. And the majority has us working here to give away old-growth Alaskan forest. We have just 2 weeks before the Transportation Authorization Bill expires and student loan rates double. And what are we doing? We are spending an entire day on a piece of legislation that has zero chance of being enacted into law. It is a package of bad ideas that are largely irrelevant to the real issues facing our nation. Title I of this bill would flood part of a wild and scenic river. Title III of this earmark is to an Alaskan Native corporation that will facilitate clear-cutting of the Tongass National Forest. Titles IV and V appear to create new parks, but include harmful provisions that would cripple the management of these parks. Title VII would authorize the death penalty for sea lions whose only crime is eating fish. Title X would overturn the protections for endangered turtles from being run over by off-road vehicles. Title XI would extend the practice of below-cost grazing on public lands, a bargain basement discount for cattlemen all across this country not paying their fair share, actually being on a type of federal welfare for cattlemen. And unbelievably, Title XIV would create a 100-mile drone zone along our northern and southern borders, within which the Border Patrol could suspend 36 environmental laws and seize control of all public land management. Let me spend a moment here talking about what I find to be the most offensive part of this legislation. Title 14. This is the national map. And what the Republicans do here today is they take a 100-mile area all along the northern border of the United States and the southern border of the United States, and they create a new area. And this new area is really a drone zone. And the reason that it's a drone zone is that it allows for 36 health and safety and environmental laws to be overridden, and it would expand the area where the Department of Homeland Security could use drones for surveillance, and allows the Department of Homeland Security to shut down national parks at a moment's notice. So all of a sudden, the Department of Homeland Security can start using drones in this area. Now, when you add up all of the space that is now included, it is equal to the total area of California, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Connecticut combined, which will now be in this new special area that has the Department of Homeland Security determining where drones can be used. And as we know, that won't be just for ensuring environmental laws are not being violated. They'll be over this whole area. Now, if you take a look at this map, I understand why the gentleman from Utah introduced this bill. Utah is far away from the Republican drone zone. They're not within 100 miles of the border of the Mexican or Canadian peoples. But what if you live in Maine? Nearly your entire state is in this drone zone. Want to go to Acadia National Park? Better check with the Department of Homeland Security and the Republicans first. Or Minnesota, maybe you want to take a trip up to the Boundary Waters. Well, better check with the Department of Homeland Security and the Republicans first. Or Olympia National Park in Washington State. Better check with the Department of Homeland Security or the Republicans first. Want clean air in the drone zone? Better make sure the Department of Homeland Security and the Republicans haven't exempted the Clean Air Act. Want to drink some water after a long hike? Better make sure the Department of Homeland Security and the Republicans haven't waived the Safe Drinking Water Act. Make no mistakes, this isn't a bill that actually addresses America's immigration issues. Neither the Department of Homeland Security nor its Customs and Border Protection Division support this bill. They don't want this authority. But the Republicans are insisting on giving them this authority. 100 miles in, along the Mexican and Canadian border. The GOP's drone zone bill does not increase resources for border agents, but instead turns over our natural resources to the Department of Homeland Security. Passing this bill does not increase the number of Border Patrol agents, boots on the ground. It just ignores the protections against trampling on sovereign and sacred ground like tribal grave sites. It does not look for a path to citizenship. It tells American families on vacation or just having a picnic that the Department of Homeland Security can kick you off a path at any moment. Under this bill, ranchers and their cattle can be herded away by border agents, jeopardizing their entire ranching operation. Families and visitors to public parks can have their trips canceled, and the water and the air and the land will be left unprotected. Instead of working to pass a DREAM Act to help solve the immigration challenge, House Republicans instead want to create a nightmare scenario at our borders. That's why more than 50 Hispanic and Latino groups have joined with environmental organizations, tribal groups, and organizations representing sportsmen and hunters to oppose the Republican drone zone bill. 50 Hispanic and Latino groups opposing this bill. We might be spending 4 hours here today on the House floor in a legislative twilight zone created by the majority, considering a bill that isn't grounded in reality. But as we do, let us not forget that there are millions of Americans outside of this alternative reality who are trying to make ends meet, trying to keep their families together and safe, and hoping to maintain the environmental protections which make our country great. I urge a no vote on this bill. On this vote, the yeas are 188, the nays are 234. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill is adopted. Gentleman from Massachusetts. The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
A final passage vote on the Land and Water Bill. The legislation combines 14 bills from the Natural Resources Committee. Among the provisions in the bill listed by Congressional Quarterly, it waives environmental laws to facilitate Homeland Security Department operations along the border, authorizes the hunting of sea lions in the Pacific Northwest to protect endangered fish populations, and permits greater use of federal funds by states to acquire and establish target shooting ranges. The Associated Press writes that the Obama administration today added Syria to the list of countries that could face U.S. sanctions for not doing enough to combat human trafficking. 16 other nations were included among those not making significant efforts to meet minimum standards, while Venezuela and Myanmar were among those removed from the group of worst offenders. You can see the State Department's press conference on the annual Human Trafficking Report in our overnight programming on C-SPAN 2, and right now at cspan.org.
On this vote, the yeas are 230.
I've been the honor. Who we got first?
Mr. Peterson.
Green.
Yep.
Who votes aye?
Mr. Peterson votes aye. Mrs. Emerson.
Votes aye.
Mrs. Emerson votes aye.
We close again. Close.
On this vote, the yeas are 232, the nays are 188. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2938 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 307, H.R. 2938, a bill to prohibit certain gaming activities on certain Indian lands in Arizona.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The last vote of the day on a measure that would aim to prevent a casino from being built on an Indian reservation in Arizona. Later this week in the House, the Domestic Energy Bill and possible work on the FDA user fee bill. Employers in April posted the fewest job openings in 5 months, and the Associated Press writes that anticipation is high that the Federal Reserve will announce some new step Wednesday to try to rejuvenate the U.S. economy and boost investor confidence. Just what that might be is unclear. One option would be an effort to drive long-term interest rates even lower to try to spur borrowing and spending. A more modest step would be for the Fed to stress its readiness to do more should the economy weaken further. We'll have Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke's news conference after the Federal Open Market Committee meets tomorrow. That'll be at 2:15 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3.
this vote, the yeas are 343, the nays are 78, 2 being recorded as present, 2/3 being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk a privilege report from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
The clerk will report the title.
Report to accompany House Resolution 691, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 4480 to provide for the development of a plan to increase oil and gas exploration, development, and production under oil and gas leases of federal lands under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of the Interior, and the Secretary of Defense in response to a drawdown of petroleum reserves from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Referred to the House calendar and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a previously noticed motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to instruct conferees on H.R. 4348 offered by Mr. Walz of Minnesota. Mr. Walz of Minnesota moves that the managers on the part of the House at the conference on the disagreeing votes of the two houses on the Senate amendment to the bill H.R. 4348 be instructed to resolve all issues and file a conference report not later than June 22, 2012.
Pursuant to Clause 7 of Rule 22, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Walz, and the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, each will control 30 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. And I want to thank the gentleman from Tennessee for being here. I know his commitment to building infrastructure in this nation is unquestioned. He's been a good friend and a gentleman on the committee. I think what we're here today, Mr. Speaker, is the American people deserve better from us. We have a need in this country that is obvious to everyone. The infrastructure in this country is crumbling. 70,000 deficient bridges, nearly half our highways in disrepair. And being a member from Minnesota, that hot August day almost 5 years ago when the I-35W bridge fell into the Mississippi River is a stark testament of what we can do.
The House is not in order.
Gentleman will suspend.
No, thank you.
House will come to order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Transportation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Transportation Committee, by command of the Constitution, if you will, has always been there to build the post roads. This nation has built canals, locks, dams, ports. They built railroads that connected the continent and spurred the Industrial Revolution. We built interstate highway system that made the American economy the envy of the world. We have possessed vision, we've possessed willpower, and we've done it in a manner that incorporated bipartisan support and, at the end of the day, compromise. The last bill, Safety Lou, that passed by a vote in this House in 2005 of 412 to 8. In the Senate, 91 to 4. The previous bill, 297 to 86, 88 and 5 in the Senate. 91, 372 to 47. The Senate, 79 to 8. And in 1987, over the last 25 years, 350 to 73. We have the will. We simply need to exercise the political willpower to move this piece of legislation. So this motion to instruct is very simple. 100 days ago, the Senate passed their version. It received 74 votes to 22. It is a bipartisan bill. Now, I will be the first to tell you, the prerogative of the House to lead is sacred to us here. We need to have a say in this. We need to make sure that we have what the People's House has their voice in things. The problem we have is we've been sitting in conference committee for 45 days with a deadlock and no end in sight. So this motion to instruct, yes, it's a non-binding sense of the House, but I would argue it's far more than that. This is a sense of the American public. They sent us here to do some basic work. They did not send us here to agree with each other on everything, but they did have that understanding that the glue that binds the nation together is compromise, and there are a few things, very few things, that historically have been bipartisan. The transportation bill has been one of those. So what this MTI asks is rectify the differences, Compromise to the point that we can get something on the floor and finish the work by June 22nd, by this Friday. Then give us the opportunity to exercise the American will by having their representative discuss what needs to be there. If we can't come to a compromise, bring us the Senate bill and let's have the up or down vote. If it passes, we can move forward. If it doesn't, then we start and go on from there. But I have to tell you, we can't afford to kick this can down the road, and I would say the proverbial crumbling road. The Chamber of Commerce has made the case. Failure to keep up with infrastructure needs in the U.S. cost this economy $2 trillion between 2008 and 2009. Every year we do nothing, we spend over $100 billion on idling tax. We waste 1.9 billion gallons of fuel yearly. That's 5% of our fuel needs. That's money going to foreign countries who hate us. They'll hate us for free. We can be more efficient. We cannot waste Americans' hard-earned dollars staring at the bumper in front of them. We can do it safely, and we can move our products to market faster. And we have that power. I said it this morning. I'll continue to say it. Up above the Speaker's chair up there, the quote from Daniel Webster. How about we do something worthy to be remembered for? How about we come together and pass a bill that people say they did the people's work, they compromised. It's not about getting what each of us wants. It's about getting what the American public needs. So with that, I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise to claim the Republican time on the motion to instruct, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
First of all, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the kind words from the gentleman from Minnesota, and he is correct in that I am very much committed to trying to produce and pass a good transportation bill in this Congress. When the gentleman's party was in control of the House and the Senate and the White House a couple of years ago, they couldn't, for various reasons, pass the bill, and I certainly hope we can in this Congress. For the past 3.5 years, about half the time when I've come to the floor, I've had some member on both sides come up to me and say, when are we going to pass a highway bill? And this is my 24th year in this body, and I've been involved actively with all of those bills that the gentleman from Minnesota mentioned, all of which passed by overwhelming margins. And as he said, the last highway bill that was passed in 2005 passed with only 8 votes in opposition. I agree, and I think all of the people on our side of the aisle agree in principle with Mr. Walz's motion to instruct. We should focus our efforts on completing the conference report and delivering a bill to the President's desk before the surface transportation programs expire at the end of this month. Unfortunately, up until this moment, the Senate has not shown a sufficient willingness to address the House's top 4 priorities: streamlining project delivery, program consolidation, state funding flexibility, and equitable funding formulas not based on past earmarks. When the average transportation project, Mr. Speaker, takes 15 years to complete, I cannot help but think there's something wrong with the current system. And as the gentleman from Minnesota mentioned, when the will is there, these projects can be completed in record time, such as the I-35 bridge in Minnesota after it collapsed. Bureaucratic red tape is the main culprit, and more, much more, must be done in the reauthorization bill to accelerate the process by which projects are approved. Every other developed nation is doing similar type projects in 1/3 or half the time that we are. And it is ridiculous that we are wasting so much money dragging these projects out for so many years. We can accomplish the goal of accelerating the process without harming the environment, but the Senate so far has shown more interest in catering to radical environmentalists than building infrastructure projects. Program consolidation is another important form that the House is pushing for in this bill. The Senate insists on including 2 new programs at the cost of $3 billion a year that would allow the administration to play politics with the funding that should go directly to the states. At a time when the Highway Trust Fund is going broke, we should focus our limited transportation dollars on consolidating programs and eliminating wasteful programs, not creating new ones. Funding flexibility for the states is critical to allowing the states to fund the most economically significant highway and bridge projects. The federal government should not mandate that states spend their limited federal aid funding on flower planting and transportation museums and other questionable projects. While state budgets are squeezed to the breaking point, states need to be given flexibility. Some states need to spend more on bridge replacements. Some states need to spend more on crumbling highways. Some states have done more already on highway beautification and other enhancement type projects and don't need to spend quite as much in that area as possibly some other states. States need to be given some flexibility. Most states have a backlog of crumbling bridges and highways needing to be rehabilitated. Why not allow them to focus their limited resources on the greatest needs in their states? The needs vary from state to state. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the funding formula for how federal highway funding is distributed to states is based on the number of earmarks, in part at least on the number of earmarks the states received in the last reauthorization bill. Funding formula should be based on the most equitable factors that are part of a state's transportation system, not which member of Congress fared the best in the last go-around. I hope these reasonable issues can be resolved before the end of the week, and I reserve the balance of our time.
A gentleman from Tennessee reserves. Who seeks time? A gentleman from Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate my friend allowing me to speak on this. There's no one I have more respect for than my good friend from Tennessee. I had a great time working with him on a variety of things when I was on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. But with all due respect, I think the issue here is what we are going to do to rebuild and renew America. For the first time in history, our Republican friends gave us a partisan transportation reauthorization. Never before have we seen anything like this offered up. There wasn't even a hearing before the full committee before it was advanced. Went right to work session. There was no effort to involve people on the other side of the aisle. We were given a piece of legislation that attacked transit, that scaled down funding, that was against the most popular programs, the ones that have the greatest local involvement, the enhancements. It was an environmental catastrophe. It was so bad that my Republican colleagues couldn't even bring their bill to the floor. They withdrew it. And so we had the 9th extension. We have been given a bill in the other body that, as my good friend from Minnesota pointed out, received 74 votes. It will give us 2 complete construction cycles. It does, in fact, accelerate environmental processes. There is a compromise, a bipartisan compromise on the previous contested area of enhancements. It is a reasonable way for us to go forward. Mr. Speaker, in contrast to this, we have a Republican budget that will not even fund the current obligations. It will cut out entirely the ability to move forward with any new federal partnerships for infrastructure. I think the motion to instruct is a modest step forward. I respectfully suggest that what we ought to do is not just approve the motion to instruct, we ought to approve the Senate bill and get on with business.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I thank the gentleman for his leadership on transportation issues. With that, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Schuster, a leading member of our committee.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentleman for yielding. I rise in support of the motion to instruct. Passing a transportation bill is about jobs. It's about keeping America competitive in the world. So I, for one, am urging a yes vote on this motion to instruct. I believe it's critical to America that we pass a transportation bill. I'd like to correct a few facts that my good friend from Oregon just put forward. The gentleman, to my recollection, has been on the Ways and Means Committee for the past couple of years, 4 years I believe it has been. So I don't know how privy he was to what we did in the House Transportation Committee to try to be inclusive to our Democratic colleagues, to work with them. And we worked with him as openly, more openly than the Chairman Oberstar when he chaired the committee. We did have a full committee hearing on it. In fact, we had 18 hours of debate, and as I recall, when Chairman Oberstar chaired the committee, we had 0 hours of debate in the full committee because a bill from a Democratic-controlled House didn't even make it to the full committee. So we worked hard and we talked with our colleagues. Unfortunately, being bipartisan is not just one party saying that they can't work with another party. It takes 2 of us to tango. And we did in the last bill. I wasn't happy with much of Chairman Oberstar's bill, but to move a bill forward, we said, okay, we're with you, we'll move the bill. Our Democratic colleagues chose to make it a partisan fight by not getting together with us. But I applaud my friend from Minnesota with this motion to instruct. We need to move forward. And what we've been negotiating in the Senate, really 5 provisions on our streamlining that are extremely important. Eliminating duplication, where you have a state that's environmental review process is as strong or stronger than the federal review process, that should take the place. It should substitute for the federal review process. And the _1 example of that is California. California is far stricter on environmental reviews than the EPA is. So why don't we allow California to move forward without having to go through a NEPA review at the federal level? Hard deadlines, concurrent rather than consecutive reviews with hard deadlines. And we've been talking to the Senate for the past couple of months about this, but they insist upon having safety valves. What do safety valves mean? That means that an agency can go to the Secretary of Transportation and ask for a waiver and say they need more time. That's not going to help to streamline this process because we know what will happen. It will be continuing to prolong these review processes. Funding thresholds for a NEPA review. If a project receives de minimis amounts of federal funding, it should not be subject to a federal NEPA review, but should go through the same regulations as a state project. And we've already moved on this. We sent a counteroffer to the Senate moving on our position, so in good faith, that's what we've been doing in the House. Categorical exclusions, another minute.
I yield the gentleman 1 more minute.
Gentleman's recognized for additional minutes.
Categorical exclusions in right-of-ways. If you're going to replace a bridge in the same footprint, we shouldn't have to go through these endless, long environmental reviews. We should be able to build that quickly and efficiently. And in fact, my colleague from Oregon, who's the ranking member on the Highway Subcommittee, has suggested that there is some common ground there. In fact, I quote him, he said, we're going to have a few... It's had to do with putting streetcars back in the streets. We're going to have fewer cars on the road. Why should we spend a lot of time and money studying it? And I agree with them. And finally, when there's a disaster, allowing a lot of these to eliminate or to reduce significantly these reviews they have to go through, just in the case of I-35 that was mentioned earlier, to be able to build that bridge in a much more efficient, faster time to get it up and running. I support the gentleman's motion to instruct, and I stand ready as a Republican on the Conference Committee to put a bill forward that we can pass here, and I would urge all my colleagues in the House to support this motion to instruct, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania as a good friend and a colleague and an honest broker on things. I agree. We're getting into this, and I agree with the gentleman on the categorically excluded bridges.